Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And Dr. Paul, we want to follow up from Linda's call because she brought up some very interesting points.
Yeah.
And one of them which we identified, and it's so significant, because there is a difference in terms of someone who was victimized at a very early age. It was persistent, ongoing, widespread, as opposed to someone who might be victimized, in their late teens, early 20s, or even maybe, when they started high school. Or can we talk a little bit about that? Because
absolutely.
it's really important.
It's so important that, you know, particularly between the ages of 2 and 10 or 2 and 12, we are becoming the people that we are. We are hardwiring truth into our minds. And so if somebody is those early patterns, so when we start to learn, what is normal, what is a caring relationship, what is a supportive relationship, and well, in my house, that's being sexually abused or that's being beaten. And so no matter how much I go on to learn after that, I'm supposed to have healthy relationships, those early relationships trump what happens afterwards. And so we see repeated, people who are sexually abused as children, more often than not, end up being sexually abused again, being victimized. And how does it happen? Because, again, don't tell anybody, don't do that. That becomes hardwired. This is the correct form of behavior. So even women who have gone through all kinds of recovery, if they're placed in those situations again, very often still won't fight, won't tell anyone, because that's what they learned at their earliest age. And
the key there, when we're talking, and in terms of the situations that Linda described, really speaks to the importance of helping your child to develop a healthy self-esteem, self-image, and as much as possible to ensure that within the home we're not doing anything to bully and traumatize and harass and abuse. And if it's happening, that we're looking at ways to counter that. And if it's happening outside the home, that we're looking at ways to help the child deal with that. Because you are so right. Those first few years, it is, I'm not going to say it's impossible, because it's not impossible, but it really is a huge challenge for that person to overcome that. Once those, as we say, those messages have been registered in the brain.
And I think, some parents will become defensive because they go, well, how dare you say I'm bullying my child? I've got to get them to do what I want them to do, and I've got to. So I guess, how I would look at sort of defining factor between bullying and discipline is, can the child make choices? Do they have options? Because one of the really crippling things about a bullied person is they feel powerless.
Exactly.
Right? So even children, and sometimes I get into this with parents, I go, can we make people do what we want them to do? And some parents will go, yeah, I hope so. And I say, no, you can't. Not without their agreement, right? And so, again, how are you getting that agreement? Is it by, discussion and consequences and something respectful?
Giving choices, setting clear limits.
Yeah, or setting limits, clear limits, or is it, get in your room right now, or you're getting the backside of my hand, which enough of us grew up with. I mean, it gets dangerously close to home. That was not that strange when we were growing up, that, corporal punishment was absolutely, and so, dare I say, some of us may have been bullied in our own homes, and that's not, and often children who are bullied don't identify the parent, like, they remember the schoolyard incident, and you have to ask them, really, if you wind it back and go, but what was life at home like? What were your parents like? Oh, they were nice, they were loving, and And I go, well, tell me about nice and loving. You go, well, my father, well, okay, yeah, he used to beat me up all the time, and he used to, but, you know, he loved me.
Yeah.
They're very defensive about this topic, and so we have to be very careful, I think, about, or, you know, examining where the bullying takes place,
Yep.
and for that matter, as you say, where the bully comes from. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because either if you've experienced, either you're going to grow up and identify with the bully and in turn bully others, or you're going to identify and see yourself as a victim and thereby allowing yourself, unfortunately, to possibly become victim to other situations.
Victim, or at least, you know, in terms of your self-esteem. Again, I have clients who say, you know, in grade 6, somebody called me ugly, or somebody called me fat. And today they look fantastic. They look thin. They've, you know, gone through exercise. They don't feel that way because those early messages are still with them. They still feel like the fat kid. They still feel ugly. And I say, you know, and there is, so this fundamental disconnect between what I see, the person I see, and the person you see in the mirror, I don't think is the same. They're two different things. But that truth has gotten hardwired into their brain. I'm ugly. And so it just shows you how significant anything that's said. And I try and break it down for them. I go, now how old was this girl? You know, and then they'd say, well, she would have been 11. Say, so if I brought in an 11-year-old girl here, and she started telling you you were something, or started yelling at me, telling me I was ugly, would you listen to her? Would you respect her? They go, no, of course I wouldn't.
Of course not.
Of course I wouldn't.
Not.
We'd tell her to get out of here and get lost. Just try and give them some perspective on how, because it's locked in time. This is, you know, truth from grade 6. So to have them understand that that was not truth in grade 6. This was some goofy kid in your schoolyard that just happened to have something, you know, couldn't think of anything better to say.
It just grabs a hold and it doesn't let go. And from my experience, I've found situations where sometimes it's in the 20s, early 30s, that sometimes these thoughts and feelings resurface, and people are often dealing with incidents of depression, anxiety, and not even are they aware of what is underlying here.
All the
Except
time.
they just know they're not happy, they feel hopeless.
All the time.
You know?
And so it without exception, someone comes in and asks, you know, just feeling anxiety. And, you know, within a few minutes I'm asking, you know, tell me about your life in elementary school, or at least at that time in your life. And without exception, nothing starts today. No anxiety started today. And it all goes back, almost without exception, goes back to either what was going on at home at that time or what was going on at school at that time. And then they started a pattern. And basically what happens to victims of some sort is start to internalize and repress emotions, repress sadness, repress anger, so that because I don't feel confident enough, I don't feel, which works for a long time, but over time, the system doesn't, so it works for the teens and the 20s, it gets you, and then, one day I'm just feeling a little bit overwhelmed, and what's this? Well, the system breaks down. It does not continue to work, and so, yeah, and they may be surprised to learn that this is based out of something in their childhood, which they are very often hesitant to go back and talk about because it is such a painful experience.
Very painful.
So to go back and go, can we talk about this experience? And they're like, well, no, I'd really like to leave that alone. But often we can't. If there's anything I've learned, is we never escape our childhoods. You know, we can add on to them. We can.
So true. And you think, because like you're saying, you know, as particular if the trauma didn't start at a young age and it was that pervasive, that's pretty hard to avoid usually. But if it's other situations, you know, you may be a little bit insecure and somebody said or did something, you know, when you were in elementary school or high school really set you up, you know, then there are a couple other incidents. Those sorts of things, you try to put it behind you. That's what we think we're doing. And one day, it pops up, and you don't recognize it anymore because how it's coming out may not look like anything that happened, and we're not able to make those connections. And we think that if we push it aside, if we don't talk about it, if we pretend it didn't happen, or I wasn't that bothered by it, because that's what I find a lot of times. No, I wasn't that bothered. No, I'm okay. When really, no, you're not.
And there's often again, like, I'm good for a long time. And then there's some catalyst later in our life. Either can be our own child is going through some sort of bullying situation.
Yes.
And suddenly we find ourselves, violently defensive for our own child. Well, where did that come from? Or we're in a workplace situation and we have a boss that somehow triggers whatever's going on. And suddenly, I have these anger, I have a violent temper or bouts of crying. Where is this coming from? Well, we finally, the straw that broke the camel's back, and this stuff that one of the, falsest things I think we ever say is, just put that out of your mind. Just put that out of your mind. For a while we can, but generally speaking, all of the things stay there, unless we repress them. Some people do. It's very common where people just go, nope, didn't happen. In fact, I wasn't bullied. But generally speaking, it's coming around, and
it always finds a way to come out. It finds a way to come back, and we can try avoidance, denial, what have you, but it comes out. And one of the things you said, and that is so significant, and I think for people, when we talk about repressed anger, because that's how I see depression, really is often rage, anger, misplaced, repressed. Would you take your...
Yeah, absolutely. I think that both anxiety and depressions are like, in my experience, all stories make sense, right? So depression, anxiety, those are something. Those are like the pathology, the way your body is finally telling you too much anger, too much sadness that you are not paying attention to. I'm going to start giving you a big message.
Exactly.
Which is...
we need to listen.
Yeah.
We will be right back. No, it's true. And